Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell. Welcome to R&D with D&D. It is November 15th, 2023, and I'm here with my co-host, Dave Levine. Hey, Dave.
Hey Denise, good to see you.
Great to see you too. Dave and I just kind of wanted to catch up and discuss some of the things that have been hitting our radar lately and try and leave you with some good takeaways about what's been going on in the world. One thing, of course, that has been going on in the world lately is the war in Israel against Hamas and the fallout of various kinds here at home from that war, including a marked rise in hatred and hate speech and anti Semitism in general, and anti Islamic sentiment as well. Everything is just sort of on a hair trigger. And to that point, Dave, you were just in DC yesterday.
Yeah, Denise, I went up to Washington to attend the March for Israel. I'm which was focused on three topics: opposing anti-Semitism, releasing the hostages that have been taken by Hamas, and supporting Israel. And it was very interesting to be there because while I am pro-Israel and consider myself a Zionist, I have severe doubts about the current Prime Minister Netanyahu and how he's been promulgating this. And as part of that, I'm quite concerned about the horrific toll on the Palestinian population, including some 4,000 children that have died. It's a hard situation for a variety of reasons, but the primary one being that I don't have confidence that this prime minister is doing all that might be done to prevent, the loss of life, even where Hamas is using the population as shields. It was very difficult. The protest slash march was overall very positive, and it was interesting to meet people from around the country. But it's a very difficult time right now.
I'm so glad to hear it. I was a little worried when you told me you were going up that, things could go sideways or south rather quickly. And I'm really glad you and your family had a great experience up there. Looked like the turnout was quite impressive too.
They were saying that there were going to be 100,000. I mean, I felt like there were a lot more. I think the numbers that are being floated around now are around 300,000. One amusing point is, I was wondering, would there be counter protesters, people supporting a Palestinian cause. And while I saw some graffiti, the strongest counter protest I saw was from people I believe to be Satmar Hasids, in other words, Jews, who come from a really fringe community that focuses on Israel's existence being more or less against the will of God based upon a very strict interpretation of the Torah. But it was in an odd way amusing that the counter protests primarily that I saw came from other Jews.
Yeah, that is incredible. And I hadn't heard of that group before. That strikes me as possibly the most conservative of conservative sects of
More or
Judaism.
less. There was an independent filmmaker who was filming and was kind of asking people around, like, who are these people, and this filmmaker got a variety of reactions. I just walked up and tried to explain. I believe that there's only a couple of very small groups on the far right of the Israeli of the Jewish spectrum that do this. But it was interesting. But overall, it was a good day, and I think positive in most ways. And at the end of it all, my view, and Van Jones said this, is, I'm a peace guy, like Van Jones put it, and whether you're being persecuted because you're Palestinian or Israeli, those are problems. But on top of that, as someone that has followed Israel as I have, I would prefer it if Netanyahu was no longer prime minister immediately.
Yeah, and you were telling me before we started recording the way the Israeli government is set up, that's actually a stronger possibility than it would be, say, to remove an unpopular president here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert, but they more or less have a parliamentary system, so uh, they they can go through a process to remove the prime minister and have coalition governments, which is what they have now. They have kind of a war cabinet made up of people other than folks from Netanyahu's party. It's a chaotic system, although frankly, given what our Congress has been doing lately, it may not be any more chaotic than ours.
Yeah, and I guess my question assumed something that isn't necessarily the case. I mean, I posited that perhaps Netanyahu was unpopular or might be deemed unpopular enough to remove. And I from what I've been reading, I don't know that that's the case within his own country.
I think it is. I mean, at least polls I've read. I mean, I haven't talked to too many people that are fans of his, although I may not be talking to the right people, but I don't think he's very popular. I think some polls put his approval numbers in the low teens. The debate is whether he should resign now or be pushed out now, or whether you wait until some future point. My view is he should go immediately, but that's also because he was trying to destroy the judiciary prior to all of this. So I don't get it, but I'm not Israeli. It's painful to watch all of this, but I hope that cooler heads somehow prevail at this point, at least in terms of trying to figure out how to minimize the loss of non-Hamas Palestinian life.
Yeah, if this hadn't happened, wasn't he kind of on his way out?
That was the hope. I mean, that was the expectation. He was, it's a longer story. And it's not, I'm not a total expert on it, but the nutshell is that he was trying to, more or less destroy an independent judiciary to protect his own interests because of prosecution that was happening. And it wasn't looking good for him. But obviously what happened on October 7th has changed the calculation.
All right. Well, we're going to get into some more stuff about the war and the conflict a little later on in our discussion here, but we wanted to go through some items, as I said, that have just sort of caught our attention. We thought we'd want to chew through together and bring you up to speed on. One thing that I've been watching for a while now are the various and sundry child harm or young person's harm cases against social media companies that have been cropping up kind of in various ways and all over the place. The biggest one is a multi-district litigation pending in the federal courts by 42 state attorneys general coming after Meta and Google, YouTube and Instagram, TikTok and ByteDance, all the Snap, of course, all the greatest hits of social media tools that young people like to use, at least the ones I'm familiar with. They probably have a slew that they're using now that Dave and I would scratch our head and go, oh, we didn't realize that was a thing. But you've probably heard of the ones that I just rattled off, and they seem to be in the crosshairs of this massive litigation by state attorneys general that basically claim there's a design defect in these products and that they have been designed in such a way with manipulative features that make children, and I'd love to read through the complaints and some of the back and forth there and see how they're distinguishing between who exactly this case is being brought on behalf of, because in our country under the law, we treat children differently, somewhat artificially, than we do teenagers and, of course, adults. So really, this is targeting, they use the term children, and I think they do that intentionally to sort of skew the conversation and make it clear that the victims of this are people that deserve protection under the law. So anyway, that there are manipulative features that will addict the user while simultaneously lowering their self-esteem. There are a lot of statistics and data being cited about the mental health crisis among youth in our country, the jump in suicide rates, and just in general, I mean, the kids are not all right. So these lawsuits have faced one challenge from the defendants at this point, where they tried to have some claims dismissed early on, as many defendants do in cases where if you can trim out some of the, some or all of the lawsuit, ideally from the defendant's standpoint, you make some motions and see if the court will do that. And here the defendants were relying on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to say, hey, we're not responsible for the actions of other users on our platforms. These are not our own actions. If users are bullying each other or making life unpleasant for one another, we're just a go-between here. That's sort of how Section 230 works. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective here, for the defendants anyway, the court decided that if indeed we're talking about a design defect, then the companies are complicit and Section 230 is not going to protect them. So these cases are going forward. They are not the only cases out there. Separately, various school districts are starting to sue for similar grounds, and various individual families representing their own children are banding together. And I believe there's a class action pending there that involves, not a criminal prosecution or a government action, but private individuals suing over these kinds of alleged misconduct and alleged design defects. Dave, you and I both have kids. We have watched them grow up in their own social media use. So I'm sure that informs your insights on this as well as your legal training. What do you think about all of this?
Yeah, Denise. I mean, you and I have been doing this for a while, and the 230 battle is all wrapped up in it. I found it. My immediate reaction first was, how often do you see state attorneys general from the most left-leaning and most right-leaning states band together? I mean, you have states like Idaho involved in this, and states like that are very progressive, and so that to me says something. And I think what it says is something that that you've experienced as well. Which is the companies are simply do not, in my view, take as seriously as they claim these social and almost physiological impacts on children. I mean, it is a real issue. Years ago, and I think you had talked about this on your shows as well. I had a few doctors on, including a neuroscientist named Gary Small, who wrote a book called iBrain, and this book's now over 10 years old at least, where he made the point that physiologically, a child's brain doesn't have the development that would allow to make the complex decisions involving smartphones. And this was prior to social media's kind of explosion. I think it's a real issue. Now, what the law can do about it is kind of almost a separate issue. But I'm of the view that, and I'm not often of this view because I support the law that allows social media companies to be free speech platforms, but I'm very sympathetic. I mean, what do you think about it?
I kind of scratch my head as to whether litigation is the way to address this. I suppose since Congress isn't doing anything, this is the way that people have, and that state attorneys general and school districts have to address it. So it's out there, but I worry about the litigation system being a messy way to try and go about this. You're going to get different results possibly in different jurisdictions. And then possibly it winds up before the Supreme Court, and that's how we resolve differences. But that's a lengthy and convoluted process if that's what people have to go through. And I'm just more comfortable, I guess, having regulation flow from the legislative side of our government rather than the judicial side. But is what it is. It's going forward.
I mean, look, do you think that the whole purpose of this actually is to open the conversation? In other words, that it's not, I mean, because I agree with you. But we know that these kinds of lawsuits are brought regularly by law enforcement, in non, capital crime type scenarios to get conversations going. Uh,
Mhm.
and whether my theory is that that's where it's headed, as opposed to, some kind of, although it'd be awesome to see, movie like trial where, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and others are, come before a court in kind of a 12 Angry Men type scenario, and have this discussion. Do you think that it's headed that way?
Yeah, and it's possible just the fact that there's a flood of lawsuits out there will cause some positive change and more accountability in a speedier way than perhaps winding through either the judicial process or the legislative process could do. So it could be just, the leverage of having the lawsuits pending is useful if, what we want to see is uh, more safety measures, better control, actual analyses by these companies as to, gee, are we harming people? And particularly young people and particularly children, because I think there's a whole conversation to be had along those lines, that these lawsuits assume and assert a whole lot of harm and allocate a whole lot of responsibility to these companies when maybe these ills that we're seeing and the increased mental health issues that we're seeing, maybe there are a lot of factors. I'm not saying social media isn't one of them. I don't think, overuse of social media is healthy for anybody. And in a young person can be particularly problematic. But I just I feel like there's a bit of scapegoating going on here too.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Although I think when we think about technology companies, big picture, they have, as the old saying would go, some explaining to do,
Mhm.
because we can turn to a related topic, which is the use of artificial intelligence technology to do what one would expect adults would do and have already been doing, which is make pornography out of it. But a very disturbing story was reported last week. I believe it was broken by the Wall Street Journal, but then it was picked up by other news sources, where students at a high school in New Jersey used artificial intelligence to manipulate real photographs of their classmates to create pornographic images of those classmates. According to NBC New York, the students created fake news photos of their classmates that were sent in group texts over the summer. Um, at one level, of course, you can't be surprised. I mean, it's just a matter of time before these technologies would be used this way. But what really concerns me about it, aside from the use of the technology, is what we've been talking about, which is the power of the technology that we're placing in the hands of children. I mean, these are children. They are high school students. Um, the high school apparently will not release information about the students, right? The students obviously who are portrayed in these images, but also the students who did it, because they are children. But one can only assume, right? Only assume that this is just tip of the iceberg kind of stuff. There's a lot of discussion. I'm curious what you think about this, Denise, right? There's a lot of discussion about how to harness AI, which is a whole topic for another show. But you and I, have talked about and interviewed people in the revenge pornography space. The use of real videos,
Mhm.
maybe surreptitiously taken or taken consensually, but then released to the public to get back at someone. But now we're talking about technology where you don't even need to have access to the person at all, other than a picture, and the technology can manipulate human beings who are alive into pornography and worse. What's your take on how we should be thinking about this problem?
Yeah, my initial take is that our legal framework isn't really, as we sit here today, equipped to handle this problem. It could be. We have right of publicity laws that are out there that allow people to control how their name, image, and likeness are used, that were specifically or originally designed to help celebrities control that. At least in California, and I think in other states as well. These kinds of laws do not exist at the federal level in the United States. Sadly, we don't have uniformity once again, which seems to be a common thread in our country on important legal frameworks. But as things stand now, various states have right of publicity laws, and most of them, I think, allow people to who are not celebrities to control use of their name, image, or likeness. But again, these laws were enacted a while ago, and they focus on commercial use of your name, image, and likeness, somebody profiting off of that. And that is just not implicated here at all. And yet it's completely, I mean, it could be. Let's definitely acknowledge that. But doesn't seem to be, in the case here of this New Jersey high school. And in that case, you're sort of these individuals, the young women who were targeted here, their recourse, I mean, certainly there are child pornography laws and harassment laws and things that could be invoked, and probably have way more teeth from a criminal standpoint than a right of publicity law. But, if you're the lawyer that these families have reached out to, you're kind of scrambling and cobbling something together that wasn't meant to be applied necessarily to this situation. So that's kind of where things stand now. I do think that there will be legal recourse against this. I think the executive order that was just enacted this week by the Biden administration begins to touch on, in its hundreds of pages of detail, begins to touch on this kind of manipulation of imagery without an individual's consent. So I think we're at the beginning of seeing examples like this, and that they, as a society, obviously, if you Google this case, the coverage on it is extensive. It's definitely struck a nerve. The other thing that strikes me is it's a public high school. So, as the families of the perpetrators involved start to react and wonder about, what happens now for them? Does this ruin their children's lives because they were doing naughty things and unauthorized things with images of their classmates? Yeah. I wonder if the First Amendment comes into this discussion as to whether this is some sort of expression that the youngsters are going to claim they were engaged in. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, without getting too lawyerly on it, right? The Supreme Court, has a prurient interest definition of pornography and has the obscenity standards, which are amorphous. I think there's a basis for that, and moreover, it's pretty well established that children have lots of speech rights when it comes to what they wear in school and things like that. To me, the hard reality here, and on Hearsay Culture and on R&D, we express our opinions, and they may not be popular. I'm going to express this one. We adults and give a lot of, I think, lip service to really caring about our kids, but at the end of the day, I wonder whether, as my securities law professor would have called it, their quiet moments, a lot of parents are just not quite as concerned about this as we might hope they would be. I mean, we seem to have a resurgence in the last several years for some pretty obvious reasons of the, kind of old boys will be boys kind of attitude about locker room talk and all that kind of stuff. And I just wonder if, at the end of the day, if it's not your kid who's been portrayed this way, whether people look at it and kind of shrug and say, yeah, it's going to happen. and move on. In other words, I agree with you that the law has a hard time with this. I do think that social norms, for example, if we really, really didn't like this, could make it very difficult for people to release that kind of content to others without getting pushback, even from high school kids. But I'm not sure the society's really there. I think we say it. I think we have our puritanical roots still in this country, but I don't know that we actually walk the talk.
Do we have to, do you think, go so far as just to clamp down on deep fakes across the board? Because that's really what these are.
Yeah, and right. I mean, and we've had, the deep fake problem, is obvious, is I mean, at least among people that think about technology is well established. But it's been discussed, I think, mostly right in the context of like political speech and that kind of stuff. Now that we have AI out there, right? I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that's where we need to go. But I still feel like where's the outrage really? Really. And I'm not saying that people have to be outraged about everything, but my God, if I, we both have sons. I mean, if one of my sons was involved in something like this, I'd be horrified. And I'm not saying I'd be the only one to be horrified, but look, I just wonder whether parents, a lot, for a variety of reasons that are, again, topic of another show, right, are just kind of, shrugging their shoulders and saying, look, we can't control it, and it's out of our hands, and what can we do? And we're just going to wind up dealing with it.
Right. Well, we've talked about these two different, sort of headline grabbers lately, the child harm suits, and then the specific case of the high school in New Jersey, which really there's no social media platform involved here. It's just the availability of technology that could generate these images, and then they were privately shared among students. I don't see any reporting that they were posted to social media. That could certainly happen, and at some point they probably those kinds of things will probably start happening. But I wanted to circle back and see if you or I can come up with any takeaways or advice for people who find themselves, grappling with these issues. You said a moment ago, it's frightening that we have these kinds of powerful technologies in the hands of young people. Is your suggestion that we curtail that or just monitor it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this too, because it ties to both of the topics. I, though there are apps out there, if you if you have an iPhone, you can use screen time and things like that. But my takeaway from this is there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. I'm not saying that a high schooler that is behaving this way is a lost cause, far from it. But I do feel like it starts with actually setting a standard as a parent, or even just as a person that influences a child, of what is respectable behavior towards others. Because I don't think, to me, I mean, I don't think we're not banning the technology, right? The technology is out there. You're not going to really tell your kid, unless you really want to have them withdraw from the world, don't use technology. But I do think starting at a very young age, I mean, I'm really saying this to parents who are listening, who might be, have children that are 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Even that young, it's like setting a standard of respect for others. And is that a solution? I don't know if it's a solution, but it's certainly a way to approach it. Denise, what do you do? You're a little further along as far as having a son that's older than mine. So kudos. You've gotten that far. I'm still hoping to get there. What would you say?
Oh, you'll get there, no doubt. Yeah, well, I mean, you and I and our families are in this really wonderful place where, obviously you're going to have issues and conflicts with your children as they're growing up. But by and large, our children know they are loved, and we have open communication, and, there's nothing that they really want to hide from us in any sort of pronounced way, or, to the extent that they do, it's not something nefarious or harmful to others. And there are a lot of families out there in our country and in the world who are not in that kind of fortunate position. There are a lot of children who are not in that kind of fortunate position. And for them, to be navigating the dangerous waters of the kinds of technology that are out there and available without that kind of closeness with adult figures in their lives is terrifying. And I feel like, that our kids aren't the certainly they could become the problem children. They're not immune, but I'm more concerned about kids that are doing this without that kind of guidance and with, a more pronounced bitterness or neediness as far as their social interactions in the world. I mean, I feel like the kid who decided, I know nothing about the children involved in this New Jersey high school thing, but if I had to speculate, I feel like the kid who decided to throw his classmates' face into AI and have, nudes generated probably has some deep troubles in his life. And that's something that is more a function, the fact that this happened is more a function of that than of the technology itself.
And not for nothing, since you point to it, I was just looking up some demographic info on Westfield, New Jersey, where in between 2020 and 2021, the population increased and the median income in the town grew from $158,000 to over $185,000. Right. So the point being, this is a community of people who come from money. And, that's another aspect of it as well, in the sense that one can presume that or assume that coming from money means maybe you've got more stability or more influences, but that's not necessarily the case. And those influences may not be positive at all.
Right.
And which is all part of the, gigantic challenge here. But I think we're both saying it's not a lost cause, but the hard work is in there, which is why I guess to turn to UFOs might be
let's call this a little palate changer, shall we? A little palate cleanser, because we've been dealing with some heady topics. And as someone who is a huge science fiction fan and has been a fan of the space program since I was very young, and remembers the day that people first walked on the moon. I was 6 years old at the time, I think. Yeah, I think I was 5 or 6. Anyway, that near and dear to my heart is turning our eyes to the skies and deciding if we know anything and are just still perpetually scratching our heads. And I think we don't know that we know anything, but there's just been a lot of attention and a little bit more sort of formalized government scrutiny and discussion of what's going on with all these UFO sightings, or UAP. What do we call them? Anomalies. There's some sort of anomalies. I'll find that acronym at some point. But they are, there is a Defense Department all domain anomaly resolution office now established a little over a year ago. And they want people to be, submitting their UFO info. Oh, unidentified anomalous phenomena. UAPs is what we're now more sort of officially calling UFOs these days. And sent this, our lawmakers are having hearings about it. We have a government agency in the Pentagon charged with investigating these things. And just last night, I saw Kirk Douglas and his son talking about Goldie, Goldie Hawn, the son's mother, who definitely believes that she's had a UFO encounter. The son himself believes that he and some friends saw something unnatural and unhuman in the sky. And I think a lot of people have had that experience. The closest I came to having such an experience was I managed to catch sight one dark, starry night out in the wilderness of Starlink, the whole chain of Starlink satellites before I knew what it was. And it sent my son and I running, screaming. Because you see that thing and you don't know what it is. That is definitely the invasion coming on.
I with my 14-year-old, but they're not UFOs. They're just unidentified anomalous phenomena that occur when a 14-year-old makes decisions. But that's a whole separate problem. I think I did see one time what I thought was a kind of a disc. But as is usually the case, it turned out to be I believe like a jet flying low. But you're right. I mean, also there was a whistleblower, right? Not long ago, who came out and said, there's all this information inside the government. It's it's silly, I think, to say what do you make of it, but let's do it anyway. I mean, are we at the point where we should be taking these things more seriously? Because it sure seems like if the government's forming these entities around it, are they trying to prevent panic? It's a wild thing.
It seems to be a theme among the stories we've been talking about today, the both ubiquity of technology and the greater abilities that it has. So, with everybody out there with cameras filming strange things and other technologies able to better pick apart, okay, was this faked? Can we attribute, what this object is? Can we enhance? Can we figure these things out? I do think that we're going to get a lot more data, if nothing else. And maybe there will be interesting things revealed from that data. I'm not making any predictions, but I do think, the more technology, including AI, that we throw at this strange situation, the more that we will know.
It is occasionally, you read these stories about, the efforts to communicate, right? I forget, and I should remember this now, the SETI.
SETI.
Right? SETI, and where you could, you could share your computer processing power with SETI through screensavers, right? To have it process all of this data being gathered to look, to randomly kind of hunt for signs of life, via sound and space.
It was called SETI at home. I proudly did it for years.
I did it for years too. And, I thought, this is, I mean, of course, we thought we needed screensavers, and modern screens, you don't need to worry about that either. So if anyone using screensavers at home, there's a tip. You don't need to use it anymore. And as long as you have a device created in the last 10 plus years, although if you enjoy looking at pipes and bouncing things, or SETI. But I always felt like, what if my computer, which is like the lottery dream, right? What if they get back to me and they say, at 2:30 in the morning, when we happen to be using your computer, we found life? I mean, would that be worth your time? We have been talking about some pretty heavy topics right off the bat. But I'll come back to, the Star Trek ethic, right? Which is, we'll all be humans and work together the moment that there's life found somewhere else. And in that sense, I hope we find something quick.
Yeah, me too. Let's crunch some data.
Let's get going on it.
Yeah.
But let's turn in the time we have left to, we're going to another heavy topic. We probably may want to time these differently next time. But going back to the Israel Hamas war, I've been struck by the release of some of the videos, not from Hamas, which I have avoided and I are not making the rounds. I've seen a few, but a video that was released by the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, and particularly the Israeli Navy, that was about a week or a few days into the war itself, was intercepting Hamas terrorists who were attempting to go by sea into Israel, and they released a video which to me can only be described as real life first person shooter video game type footage. And I just want to play a little of it here, so that we can have a sense of what this was and what to make of it, because it really was pretty mind-blowing to me.
So yeah, I feel like you just dropped us into World of Warcraft.
I mean, literally.
Or Call of Duty.
Right. And if people can't quite tell, I mean, there are those little black marks in the water are apparently people.
Oh wow.
I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think, why Israel would release such a video. I mean, it's evidence of what the country is confronting. At the same time, one's humanity is impacted by it. I mean, again, they are terrorists in the water, but if I didn't know better, I could look at that and say that could be any game potentially, particularly the view of, looking down at the gun, but also it makes the whole experience of knowing this is happening in a sense very abstract, right? Because it conjures up video.
Yeah, just because of our context of those kinds of images. I see what you're saying. Yeah. And it's interesting. I wonder if you have seen too, I don't see a whole lot of US military recruitment materials, but every now and then, something will be on while I'm watching TV or whatever. And I have been struck by how the marketing slant toward young people, to get them interested in potentially volunteering, is aimed along these lines, is giving them that context that they're familiar with. And I think, partially it's to make them feel like, oh, I've got this, I already know how to do this. I've been doing this for a long time and now I can help my country doing it. So there could be that aspect of it too.
I remember, we're both old enough to remember one of the early arguments for why video games weren't so bad, right? I'm talking about like in the 80s, right? Which is hand-eye coordination. I don't know if you remember that one, Denise. I spent way too much time in high school sitting in front of my Commodore 64 in the early and mid 80s, playing video games, in perfecting my hand-eye coordination. But none of it was realistic. I mean, none of it was. And while I reject and still don't buy the evidence that says that video games cause violence, I definitely will say this: video games do cause a depersonalization of what you're seeing. I mean, I can appreciate the release of that video. On the other hand, I wouldn't want, if a child was going to see, and that's been a theme of today's program, I'd want a lot of explanation as to what this is, and the fact that these are real people and real guns on both sides of this. and that it isn't just something you do to make a cool video that, which by the way, the IDF posted on YouTube, right, along with every other thing that's put out there. It's very surreal's a lousy word to use. It's disturbing. This is the bottom line. It's disturbing. And of course, the reporting around this video, depending on the source, was either very factual or very celebratory.
Yeah.
Other aspect of.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And if I were to have a takeaway, some sort of practical tip for our listeners who, will start to notice, no doubt, more and more of this kind of thing, either whether it's coming from the Israeli Navy or other military branches who are making that connection between the first person shooter view and people's relationship to conflicts is if you haven't read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, it's very much right in this wheelhouse and involves training squadrons of young people to play a game that they think is a game that it's not. It's combating their mortal enemy, and ultimately, well, I don't want to ruin the book for you. It's a very good book, but yeah, it's
And by the way, not for
yeah.
nothing, I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, as you know,
Yeah.
and Orson Scott Card is a resident of Greensboro.
Oh, I didn't know. That's awesome. Please
He's
say
not,
hi.
yeah, I was about to say, I don't think people really see him. I certainly haven't, but he does apparently live here. But we're winding up our time here. We're at about our mark, Denise, but we can close in this first, I should note, right? Our first foray into this format for R&D that we definitely love your feedback on. Listeners, you can email Denise at hearsayculture.com, at me at dave@hearsayculture.com, or you can just email us at info at hearsayculture.com. But well, we're closing today with a few one or two more thoughts, Denise, as we give this a shot.
Yeah, I wanted to leave us first of all with a milestone. It seems like that's a good thing to do at the conclusion of a discussion like this. Reflect on things that are happening day to day in our world that are moving us toward whatever new world it is. We're very close to AI playing a critical role in developing new drugs. There is a company in China, headquartered in both Hong Kong and New York, actually, which is using AI to develop various experimental drugs, including one for an incurable lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The AI was used, or AI technologies were used to identify a new approach to fight against this deadly disease and produce a novel molecule to treat it. So they are in late stage trials for a drug that was developed by AI algorithms to treat this disease. And we'll begin to see more and more of that. Of course, it's very early days, and there are still long journeys for AI tools to make in combating disease, but that is one of the reasons that this is both, a technology that is fraught with things we need to look after and put guardrails on, and also fraught with potential to be able to improve people's lives. Any thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, to paraphrase the old saying, and may we have the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Is where it's at. I see the potential of AI. I think it'd be foolish to ban a technology or attempt to curtail it significantly while we're still trying to figure it out. On the other hand, the real world harms that are happening right now because of how it's been released are really my big concern. And so unfortunately, we don't have the luxury that we had with the internet, where it took the internet, we had 25 years maybe not society, but certainly technologists to figure out what the internet was. Whereas with AI, as far as the public goes, it went from 0 to 60. And we've had to slow it down, which more or less has happened only by virtue of at least OpenAI deciding they were going to, take the foot off the brakes or the gas, excuse me, with regard to a new version of ChatGPT. But
Yeah, it's hard. It's super hard to believe it's only been a year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're coming up on it's 15 days from today. And if you think about and this is probably a topic we should cover, if you think about how much this technology has advanced in 1 year since it's been public, it's remarkable. And we don't even have regulation around this. We've got the AI Act, which is not yet law in the EU, and we've got the president's executive order, which is not law either. I mean, and again, law may not be the solution. But this means that we have plenty of things to talk about on R&D forever, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah,
absolutely, forever R&D. Let's end on that note.
There we go. Well, thank you, Denise. This has been great.
It's been really fun to catch up. Thanks again, Dave. See you soon.